Imagine being locked away in a dark, damp dungeon with no hope of rescue or escape. This was the grim reality of the infamous oubliettes, prisons where inmates were literally forgotten. The term oubliette comes from the French word oublier, meaning to forget, and that's exactly what happened to those unfortunate enough to be thrown into these dreadful pits. Unlike regular dungeons, oubliettes were specifically designed to imprison someone without any hope of release. Accessible only through a hatch in the ceiling, they made escape virtually impossible. Ready to dive into the dark tales of some of history's most infamous prisoners? Let's go. First up, let's talk about Inhumane, a trusted minister of King Philip IV. This guy went from the king's right-hand man to who in no time flat. Marini fell out of favor due to political machinations and ended up on the wrong side of the power struggle. His reward? A one-way trip to the oubliette. De Marini spent his final days in utter darkness, his name all but erased from history. Talk about a fall from grace. Another infamous prisoner was Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Becket clashed with King Henry II of England and found himself in the Tower of London, specifically in a delightful little cell known as the Little Ease, a tiny room where you could neither stand up straight nor lie down flat. Although Becket's fate took a different turn, spoiler, he didn't die in the oubliette. Many others weren't so lucky and languished in similar cells until they met their end. Then there's the tragic tale of Marguerite de Bourgogne. Imprisoned by her husband, King Louis X of France. Accused of adultery, she was confined in the Chateau Gaillard's oubliette. Legend has it she was kept in such inhumane conditions that she eventually died of cold and starvation. Her story is a grim reminder of the harsh punishments meted out during medieval times. Talk about the ultimate silent treatment. Italy had its own notorious oubliettes, particularly in the Dog's Palace in Venice. The Piombi, a series of lead-roofed cells, held the infamous Giacomo Casanova. Known for his romantic escapades and daring personality, Casanova managed to escape his oubliette in a thrilling and ingenious manner, an exception to the otherwise grim outcomes of such imprisonments. Casanova probably had a twinkle in his eye even as he was plotting his escape. But it wasn't all romance and daring escapes. What makes oubliettes particularly terrifying is not just the physical torment, but the psychological horror of being utterly forgotten. Prisoners often had no idea why they were imprisoned, how long they would be there, or if they ever would be released. It was a fate worse than death, as they were left to rot in obscurity. Not exactly a 5-star Yelp review. Another chilling story involves François Bonnivard, a Genevan monk imprisoned in the Château de Chillon. Bonnivard was chained to a pillar in the dungeon, left to contemplate his fate. His story inspired Lord Byron's famous poem, The Prisoner of Chillon, immortalizing the horrors of oubliette imprisonment. So, at least he got some literary fame out of it, right? Jean de Lamotte, involved in the infamous affair of the diamond necklace, was thrown into the Bastille's oubliette. Lamotte endured harsh conditions before his eventual release, his story adding to the tapestry of intrigue and misfortune woven by the oubliettes. Imagine explaining that on a first date. So what do? Well, I was recently in an oubliette. So why were these prisoners subjected to such cruel fates? Often they were political prisoners, enemies of the state, or individuals who had simply fallen out of favor. The oubliette was a way to remove them from society without the messiness of a public execution. It was the ultimate method of erasure, ensuring that these individuals were both physically and metaphorically forgotten. Out of sight, out of mind, and out of luck. The history of oubliettes is intertwined with the history of power and control. Rulers and noblemen used them as tools to maintain their grip on power, to silence dissent, and to eliminate threats without drawing public attention. Let's explore another notorious oubliette, this time in the Château des Locs. Here, the infamous Cardinal Jean Balue was imprisoned by King Louis XI. Balue had been a close advisor to the king but fell from grace due to political intrigue. He spent 11 years in an oubliette, a period marked by extreme isolation and deprivation. His story serves as a stark reminder of the brutal lengths to which rulers will go to secure their power. 11 years? Talk about overstaying your welcome. The use of oubliettes was not confined to France and England. In Spain, during the Spanish Inquisition, the inquisitors employed similar tactics to deal with heretics and political opponents. The castle of San Juan de Ulua in Veracruz, Mexico, built by the Spanish, contained cells that functioned much like oubliettes. Prisoners accused of heresy or rebellion were thrown into these lightless pits, left to ponder their fate in complete isolation. If only they had TripAdvisor back then. Another harrowing story is that of the Duke of Lorraine, who found himself on the wrong side of the 30 Years' War, captured and imprisoned in an oubliette in the Château de Bar-le-Duc. His confinement was marked by unimaginable suffering. He spent years in darkness, his spirit broken by the relentless solitude. His tragic end underscores the cruel efficiency of oubliettes in breaking the will of even the most resilient individuals. Looks like he really picked the wrong side. The stories of those who perished in oubliettes are not just tales of personal tragedy, but also reflections of the broader historical context in which they occurred. These prisons were products of their times, emblematic of the absolute power wielded by monarchs and the ruthlessness with which they maintained their rule. The oubliette was a tool of terror, a means to enforce obedience through fear. Basically, the medieval version of go to your room. Even in the 20th century, the concept of the oubliette persisted in various forms. Totalitarian regimes around the world have employed similar methods to silence dissent. The notorious tiger cages of Vietnam, used to hold political prisoners during the Vietnam War, bore a chilling resemblance to the oubliettes of medieval Europe. Prisoners were kept in small, dark cells, isolated from the outside world, a modern echo of an ancient practice. It's like history's way of saying, we're not done with this nightmare yet. One of the most enduring legends surrounding oubliettes involves the Château de Commeren in France. According to local folklore, a nobleman named Philippe de Commeren was imprisoned in an oubliette by his own brother, who coveted his lands and title. Philip's cries for help went unanswered, and he eventually perished in the darkness. His ghost is said to haunt the chateau, a spectral reminder of the cruelty he endured. Family drama at its spookiest. The psychological torment inflicted by oubliettes cannot be overstated. The complete isolation, the darkness, the uncertainty, all combined to create an environment of unbearable suffering. Many prisoners went mad, their minds unable to cope with the endless void. Those who survived were often scarred for life, their experiences in the oubliette leaving indelible marks on their psyche. It's like solitary confinement on steroids. The architecture of oubliettes was deliberately designed to enhance the sense of hopelessness. Narrow, vertical shafts with slippery walls ensured that climbing out was impossible. The only light came from the hatch above, and even that was often covered to plunge the prisoner into complete darkness. The air was thick and foul, the damp walls contributing to the overall misery. It was a place designed to break both body and spirit. Talk about a home makeover gone wrong. As we conclude our dark journey through the oubliettes, one can't help but shudder at the thought of being cast into such a place. The tales of Anne-Gerard de Marigny, Thomas Becket, Marguerite de Bourgogne, Giacomo Casanova, François Bonnevard, Jean de la Motte, Cardinal Jean Ballou, and the Duke of Lorraine, serving as haunting reminders of the brutal methods used to deal with dissent and disfavor throughout history. It's like a who's who of unfortunate souls. In modern times, the legacy of oubliettes can still be felt. Prisons and detention centers around the world often employ methods of isolation that are reminiscent of these ancient practices. Solitary confinement in particular echoes the psychological torment of the oubliette, raising ethical questions about the treatment of prisoners and the limits of humane punishment. It's like we're stuck on a terrible remix of an old song. Join us next time as we uncover more eerie and fascinating tales from history's shadows. And remember, sometimes it's not just about who you know, but also who you anger. Stay out of trouble, or you might just find yourself in an oubliette of your own.